All right, and we're back for another edition of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford from Inside Sports Fantasy Football, the Lakers Fast Break Podcast, and of course, Pop Culture Cosmos coming right back at you here. It was an awesome Week 8 in the NFL, and it was just something to see. A lot of stuff going on, especially on the receiving end for a couple of great receiving performances, among other notable things that happened in Week 8 of the NFL. And here to break it down with me once again is our man in the know when it comes to fantasy football. He's one of the great guys from Voice from the Underground. You got to check out what's going on today with their awesome podcast, whether it's concerning pop culture, politics, cigars, or just great conversation. It's Voice from the Underground, and here's the man himself, Jasen Dutch. What's going on, my friend?
I'm good, man. How are you? Yeah, it is better to receive than give this week in the NFL.
It seemed like it because there were some really good receiving performances, though. That's kind of what stuck out to me. Some pretty good quarterbacking out there as well, but I wasn't too impressed by the running back situation. So I think we may delve into that just a little bit. But I also want to talk a little bit later on about the flex position, and for those teams that are fighting for a playoff spot or playoff positioning as a whole. I want to talk about how much importance the flex position is in order to go ahead and advance beyond and all that good stuff. But it was Week 8 in the NFL. I do want to ask you your thoughts on Week 8. Let's start with the biggest performance, I guess, out of anything that happened this weekend, and that was in the Rams game against the Bungles. I guess you could say when they're 0-8.
Yeah, they're back to being the Bungles again.
I know. I'll tell you, it's such a shame. Andy Dalton kicked to the curb. He is out as starting quarterback. His I guess legacy, for lack of a better term, or his career in Cincinnati is probably it's in question right now. That's for sure, because it looks like the team has just had enough of his mediocre play at best. It's inconsistency all over the place. But on the flip side, in that game, Cooper Kupp, 220 yards receiving, just a sensational performance from him. We've talked before at length over the course of the season about the Los Angeles Rams receiving situation and how there was no definitive star among them because they were all sharing the load. Could this performance catapult Cooper Kupp, who is performing at a level a little bit better than any of the receivers there? Could this performance establish him as a definitive number one receiver, not only for the Rams, but for fantasy football team owners going forward for the rest of the season?
I absolutely, and I think this is not a new thing. I mean, Cooper Kupp has had a tremendous season. He's one of the top. I believe he's a top 4 fantasy wide receiver. I haven't looked at the stats, but he's definitely in the top. He's definitely in the top 10, and I would guess in the top 4. He doesn't really have any down weeks. Like Mike Evans had a huge week this week, 42 points, I believe, in most leagues, and he came off a goose egg last week. So Cooper Kupp is never going to get you a goose egg. Even now, the Rams had a couple of down weeks, and even in those down weeks, Cooper Kupp was still getting 7-10 points. So he's been performing amazingly. There's so many good wide receivers in the NFL right now. There's probably at least 15 receivers that you can really consider a wide receiver 1 or at least a 1B. Cooper Kupp is without a question in that conversation, along with your obvious ones that your DeAndre Hopkinses of the world. But even though they haven't been lighting it on fire, that one of the craziest questions is, what is Odell Beckham ever going to be a WR1 again? Because obviously people invested a very high draft pick in him, and it's interesting. That whole team is just, with the exception of Nick Chubb, who I will admit I probably should have ranked high. Well, that's still questionable. I still think he's 4. Maybe above Kamara after the injury, but I don't think if you drafted now you'd take Chubb over Saquon Barkley, and you certainly aren't taking him over Christian McCaffrey. The Kamara one, maybe he's moved up to 3, but I was putting him, easily at 4 or possibly at 5, with our friend from Dallas being in that conversation as well. So, it's just, that's the NFL season for you. That's fantasy. It's crazy though that you've got these guys who are just heads and shoulders above the rest of the league, especially when it comes to the Rams, because the Rams are a mystery. I mean, I have one fantasy team that's shockingly 1-7, and it's actually if you ask me, it's a pretty good team. It's a keeper league team, so I'll have these guys next year. I think I have Kyler Murray, Jason Goff as my 2 quarterbacks. It's a 2 QB league, and I have 3 Rams receivers. I have Robert Woods, I have Brandon Cooks, and I have Gerald Everett on that team. And I thought at the beginning, so the only one I don't have is the one who's doing super great. But Robert Woods is really, I mean, he hasn't done anything of late, and Brandon Cooks got hurt again. I mean, he had one concussion, then another. Seems to have a history of these concussions, and he's not even really startable at this point in time. And I there's no way that you could imagine saying that. I mean, that guy's one of the best deep threats in the NFL and has been for the past 3 or 4 years in his time with the Rams, and also catching from at the ball from Drew Brees with the Saints for a couple of years too. So, it's perplexing to me what's going on with the Rams. They've won the last couple of weeks, but they've had really easy matchups. They're on bye this week. So we'll have to see what happens with Cooks. But again, circling back to Cooper Kupp, he's just been amazing. He and Adam Thielen, I think, are the 2 guys who, if you grab those 2 guys in, the 4th, 5th, 6th round, which is about where they were taken, you're very happy right now with those 2 picks.
That you are indeed, but they are not the most prolific wide receiver tandem in the league. I'm going to give you one guess to go ahead and try and say which is which is the most prolific wide receiver tandem right now going in the NFL according to fantasy stats. You'll never get this one.
Yeah, apparently not, because I'm at a complete loss right now. I'm just trying to think of who has a dynamic offense.
Because one of the receivers we haven't even talked about on this show yet, and he's just snuck up into being a premier wide receiver 1.
My first guess would have been Thielen and Diggs, but I don't think that's the answer to that question. So, because there's so many out there that are good offenses where, you would have expected to have this. The Rams would have been somebody you would have expected to be in that conversation. The Chiefs would have been a team you would have expected to have in that conversation, but there's no one really doing anything besides Tyreek Hill, unless you're counting Kelsey as a receiver. So I have no idea who. I should know this, I would imagine, but I don't.
The answer, my friend,
Denver?
Is no, not in Denver, especially after they traded Demaryius Thomas. No, the answer's in Tampa Bay.
I was thinking of that when you said it, because Mike Evans has definitely been up there.
But he's not even the top receiver on his team.
But I totally forgot. I totally forgot about that. Yeah.
Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin is number 3 in the NFL. And you were right about Cooper Kupp, because he's number 2 right now in fantasy points for wide receivers. Chris Godwin is number 3 for Tampa Bay. Someone who's gone totally under the radar with a lot of individual teams, a lot of individual fantasy football places, pundits, stories out there, totally under the radar, but is having an excellent season. He is number 3 in the NFL in fantasy points from the wide receiver position. Mm-hmm. And look at that. Not too far behind at number 6 is Mike Evans, especially after he had a 200-yard receiving performance this past weekend as well. So,
well, he also had a goose egg, and he also, I think, missed a game, if I recall correctly. So that's still pretty impressive from Mike Evans.
Well, he's had a bye, and you're right. He did have a goose egg against New Orleans. So even with that is impressive, because he's had still such a fine season. Again, 200 yards receiving, just 2 touchdowns this past weekend. Really a nice game for him. So he and Chris Godwin, it looks like they're taking turns on the big games when whoever is playing quarterback at this point in time. It's still Winston playing quarterback there, but he's been feast or famine, which is just insane to me, because the fact that he has been so wild as far as either throwing for many interceptions or throwing for many touchdowns each and every week, but yet his receivers are doing so well overall, so prolific, and that, again, two top 10 receivers right there for you. That tells you something right there about their type of offense, and the fact that if you have either of these receivers, or if you can still trade for them, look to them, especially Chris Godwin, because he's totally under the radar right now, and he's number 3 in fantasy football points from the wide receiver position. So that's something to look at right there. I mean,
well, number 2.
What do you think?
No, it's pretty amazing to me because Godwin is a guy who I don't really consider to be a WR1 yet. He might be by the end of the season, but right now he's in third place. He's he's got a 10-point lead or so on Julio Jones. Just keeps on going every year. I think that guy's done, and every year he just continues to produce. And that's the thing. Like if you're in a dynasty league, that's why wide receivers and quarterback are the way to go. Don't draft running backs. Of course you're going to draft them, but these running backs are only going to last you 2-3 years. So if you can get a guy like Julio Jones, imagine you drafted that guy, his 9th year in the league, 10th year in the league now. And I mean, he's still going strong for you and is the number 4 wide receiver in football. I was close though. Minnesota does have the second biggest tandem in there. But another team that actually has a couple guys that are in the top 17 is surprisingly Detroit. I mean, Galladay's not a surprise, but Marvin Jones Jr. He's weird because like he'll have 6 points, 6 points, 35, 6 points, 6 points, 35, 6 points, 35, and kind of go like that because he has these monster games. But they've done pretty well. Matt Stafford's look really good. And by the way, I told you so about Andy Dalton back on our first time talking this year. I told you, I don't want Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton is not a good fantasy quarterback. He's not a guy that I would take other than maybe a streamer, on a bye week or something of that nature. I don't want him anywhere near my starting lineup. I never have, and I never will. I maybe a few years ago when he had TJ Houshmandzadeh and actually, was that even him quarterbacking then when he had AJ and TJ Houshmandzadeh, or was that still
I think it was him because I think is his 9th year with the team. So
yeah, what was it before him? Kitna?
Yeah, it was Kitna. It was Kitna. So, but yeah, I think it was him at one point in time throwing to individuals like Houshmandzadeh and Chad Johnson. I think he caught the tail end of that.
Right.
So yeah, it looks like something right now where it's the end of the line for Andy Dalton. Looks like it's the end of the road for him. But we see great tandems right now in Minnesota, Detroit, and especially Tampa Bay. So that's something to think about. If you have, still the ability to trade, offer that trade right now because teams are right now lining up for their playoff run. Teams that are still trying to scratch and claw their way into it are just trying to go ahead and make any desperate move they can. So now's a great time to go ahead and make those maneuvers if you're still able to go ahead and do so. But I want to ask you this, my friend. There were some other great things going on in the NFL this weekend in Week 8 in the NFL. So I want to hear your thoughts on some of the quarterbacks that are out there that truly impressed you. I mean, we talked about Aaron Rodgers after that 6 TD performance. It's looking like it just something clicked with him, the offense, the coach. After weeks and weeks and weeks of kind of malaise type deal, mediocrity, wasn't too bad, wasn't too good. Just a lot of talk about the offense, just a lot of rumors going on. There was some dissension, maybe issues with the coach and Rodgers. It looks like it's all settled down, and Aaron Rodgers is now, again, one of the premier quarterbacks in fantasy football.
Yeah, I was just checking here. He moved up to 4th in fantasy points over the past 2 weeks. He was down somewhere in the 13 range, which is still, you're still going to start Aaron Rodgers, but he's just been on fire the last couple of weeks. He's passed up Matt Ryan. He passed up because Matt Ryan was out. Passed up Dak Prescott, Mahomes and Brady, and of course Mahomes also out. So you kind of have to take those, those two with a grain of salt because, Dak Prescott had his bye, Matt Ryan was out, and Mahomes was out. But it's still the Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson show. I mean, if there's any two players who are somewhere close to Christian McCaffrey for MVP, those are really, I think, the only other two guys that could be in that conversation. And it's really nice, honestly, to be able to say that because so here's a funny quandary for you. It's possible you could say that 2 of the top 3 wide receivers in football right now are white guys, Cooper Kupp and Adam Thielen. It's probable that Christian McCaffrey, a white guy, is the number one running back. And easily the top three best quarterbacks are quarterbacks of color. Shocking. Because, I mean, you're looking at Russell Williams, Deshaun Watson, and Patrick Mahomes.
Russell Wilson.
Isn't that what I said? I said Russell
Williams.
Wilson. Oh, Russell Wilson, yeah. I mean, this would never have happened 6 years ago. You know what I mean? So it speaks to just how awesome this country is, isn't it? I mean, it's amazing that the way that, it's that Tiger Woods phenomenon. And,
it speaks to the evolution of the game, how it's being coached at, I guess, lower levels now. Whereas the traditional ways of doing it before seem to be going by the wayside, which is a good thing for the advancement of the game.
Right.
And also as a greater representation for us, like you said, as a society as a whole, whether it's this country or any others that follow the football game. So, yeah, to me, it just sounds, it speaks of, again, at those lower levels, when you're seeing those kids starting, in the little leagues, and then you go into high school, and then you go into college, not going ahead and pigeonhole them into one certain area, one certain position or another,
right.
Saying, you know what, I'm going to put you in the best position possible where you can excel as a player.
Right. It's absolutely true. And it's like, there was always that old trope before where you had the smart white guy with a bunch of fast black guys around him, and that was the way the NFL was since the 70s, all the way up until probably about 5 years ago. And it's just an awesome evolution of the game. It's something fun to watch and interesting to talk about too. So, and I think you're exactly right. It starts at the low levels. It starts, when in high school and stuff like that, saying, well, you're really good at running, but we're gonna, you're a white guy, so we're gonna put you at tight end or something of that nature. Like now, coaches are, I guess, they're woke. For a lack of a better term. So I found that to be an interesting sidebar story. Also, as far as we were talking about quarterbacks, though, you do have a situation now in Denver where Joe Flacco is probably going to throw the same amount of touchdowns the next few weeks as he has the last few weeks, because has thrown 0 and he's going to continue to throw 0 now that I think it's likely he's going to go on IR. So you've got this young guy, Brandon Allen, another guy named Allen who's going to be stepping in for him. So there's a guy that, you might want to target if you need a quarterback. The one thing that I would definitely say, there's a lot of guys out there that I was kind of looking at, like, who could be picked up, because like you were saying, now is the time to start looking at the playoffs. And the advice that I have is, if you know you're going to be a playoff team, even if you think you're going to be a playoff team, start looking right now at the matchups for your kickers and your defenses, especially for your defenses in weeks 14, 15, and 16. Find yourself a defense that preferably has already had their bye. Leagues work in different ways where, you may have to pay for a transaction, or you might have to, pick someone up off waivers or free agency or whatever. But, I have a team right now that's 7-1. So I know I'm going to playoffs in that league, and I have Kansas City's defense, and I've had them all year and they've been okay, but they haven't been great. So can't wait for tomorrow, because tomorrow I'm going to be looking for, another defense, and I'm looking for a defense that's going to have, a couple of cake matchups in the last couple games of the year. So, because those are the ones that are going to actually count. I don't care about the games until then. So keep looking at the defenses out there and look for somebody who's playing, like ESPN will usually rank the teams they're playing against in red or black, and Yahoo does it, I think, in green or red. So, look for those teams to have a couple of green matchups or black matchups, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Because if you look, and I will say, I hate defense special teams. I'm an IDP guy. I'm not in an IDP league right now. I wish I was. I can't stand defense. I can't stand it. I hate it as a fantasy position. But like we said last week, there's a lot of teams out there that are doing far better than they really should be because they have the Patriots defense. And again, they put up another 21 points this week. So it's just astonishing to me that, the points that are coming out of these defenses. So look for teams that are playing, bad teams that are probably going to be throwing the ball late because that's going to lead to sacks. It's going to lead to fumbles. It's going to lead to interceptions in the waning moments of that game for your defense. So that's definitely something I would be taking a look at right now.
Once again, I'm talking to my good friend Jasen Dutch from Voice from the Underground, the podcast. You got to check out his awesome show, Voice from the Underground, where they talk pop culture, also talk a lot of politics, cigars, and a lot of other things, including some great conversation each and every time from Voice from the Underground, the podcast. And I just wanted to go ahead and before we head on out, mention to everyone and give them an update on our show. Inside Sports Fantasy Football is, if you need to, available now on Apple Podcasts. It's also available on Breaker, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, and also Bullhorn. If you have that app, which that's one I use.
I haven't even heard of that one.
Bullhorn is a great app. I'm going to tell you right now. Ever since I got a chance to speak to one of the guys in charge, Sam Petralia of Bullhorn, I gave it a try and I'm hooked on it. As far as as far as an app that goes ahead and plays all your podcasts, because I have over 15 podcasts right now that are saved to it. As soon as one comes out, it pops up right there for you. It's easy to play. It goes ahead. Descriptions are there. It lines up everything beautifully. It gives you constant notifications on when stuff's out, but it also doesn't protrude on your smartphone with just a whole bunch of like big, huge notifications all over the place. So, you know what? To me, I like that one the best out of any app I've ever used for podcasts. So, I mean, I'm not even a paid spokesman, too. So,
yeah, you should
Bullhorn.
be.
Bullhorn is a great app for podcasts.
Give us our money, Bullhorn.
Nah, I'll get Sam back on the show at some point in time as far as on the Pop Culture Cosmos. Hopefully, I can go ahead and we'll talk more pop culture there. But yeah, Bullhorn is a great app, and I'd highly recommend it, or any one of the other great apps for the Inside Sports Fantasy Football.
I have real quick before we go here. I did identify because there's a lot of teams out there. I think who are going to be looking, fantasy teams who are going to be looking for running backs or receivers that they can stream. All these guys that I picked are somewhere around 50% or less owned. And there's a few running backs out there that might be worth taking a peek at. Kenyon Drake for this week, maybe only, even though it's a bad matchup. But he's going to be probably going to be getting the start for his new team, the Arizona Cardinals. Why on earth they traded for him is beyond me, I guess, for 1 week, but they did. It's pretty likely that Edmonds and Johnson are going to both be out. So he will at least get carries. And he's okay catching the ball in the backfield. So he might be worth a stream. And then James Conner just can't stay healthy. Jalen Samuels is coming back, so he's definitely worth a stream. And then Chris Thompson is still available in about 48% of leagues. So he is definitely somebody who can take a look at too. He's a pretty good pass catching running back. There's a plethora of receivers who are in the same ballpark. And I just want to kind of jot down a few of these names. I want to know if any of them jump out at you. Chris Conley, number one. And these aren't necessarily ranked in order. A.J. Brown from Tennessee. Preston Wilson from Miami. Deshaun Hamilton. Danny Amendola of Detroit. Deontay Johnson of the Steelers. And Kenny Stills. And then the guy who might be the guy who has done the best the last few weeks of all these guys, believe it or not, Devontae Parker. So there are guys out there. I can't guarantee that they'll be available in your leagues, but all these guys are out there who could maybe get into that flex position that you were talking about earlier in the beginning of the show, because with the flex position, you know, it's unlikely that you're going to have someone like Tyreek Hill as your flex. You know, I am always big on starting a receiver at my flex, especially if you're in a PPR league, or a running back, like maybe like of the Tariq Cohen mold. You know, especially if they're going against someone who it looks like they're going to lose, which by the way, they always do these days, because Mitch Trubisky, why did the Bears pass up Mahomes and Watson for Mitch Trubisky? They traded up to get this guy. He's a joke.
Mitchell. Mitchell.
Yes, Mitchell Trubisky, although they did lose again on a doinked field goal. Oh my God. I mean, how many doinked field goals can you have in a 2-year period? It is absolutely astonishing to me. But they have. I think they've lost 6 games on doinked field goals in the last 2 years. So pretty
getting
weird.
back to this on as far as a flex position, because I wanted to go ahead and remind our listeners that what I talked about at the beginning was flex position in your drive to a playoff spot. I think a flex position is a key to actually being that team that can get you in to the playoffs, being a team that can compete for a playoff spot and also get a higher seeding. What goes into the process for you as far as making sure that flex position is going to be a position that's going to be just about as good or even as good as one of the starting positions in either running back or wide receiver? Tell me about the process that you go into each and every week when you decide what is going to be a flex position for you. Muted.
Sorry there. It's pretty simple. I mean, you draft good players. But people will. This all starts with the draft, so it's too late for this now. But next year, keep in mind, if you're one of those people who decides they're going to take their defense, and again, I know we've had a crazy year with defense this year. We talked about that. But if you're one of these guys who's going to reach and take your defense in the 7th or 8th round, that's kind of silly because, again, I like to stream defenses. Yeah, if you have the Patriots this year, that's an anomaly. But it is just that. It's an anomaly. You have, the Bears defense of probably like 5 years ago. The Baltimore Ravens defense and Seattle defenses had good years for a couple of years there. And then the Patriots this year. But outside of that, next year, what you want to do is, go for a guy, look at your wide receivers and say, okay, I have 3 wide receiver spots. Instead of going and drafting a quarterback, after I have my 2 running backs and my 3 wide receivers, maybe I should take a 4th wide receiver and fill that flex position, or grab a second tight end. Maybe you already have, say, like Zach Ertz or something like that. You can look at taking another top tight end like a Rudolph or something of that nature, and use them. So for me, it's all about, if it's a PPR league, you're almost certainly going to go with a receiver. Unless you have 3 stud running backs, there's really no way that I would go with a running back. Like if you somehow had, say, like Barkley, Chubb, and I don't know, another stud running back, Ezekiel Elliott, you would never have those 3 guys unless you made some good trades. But then maybe you would do it. But outside of that, I really don't see. I would rather start a guy like Cortland Sutton over a guy like Carlos Hyde. I just pulled those 2 names out of my head. Because Carlos Hyde is a decent running back, but his ceiling, I think, is still lower. His floor might be a little bit higher, but his ceiling might be a little bit lower than a guy like Cortland Sutton is, or even like a Kenny Stills, because if you're going to catch 7 balls, that's the equivalent of 70 rushing yards. You know what I mean? And then you haven't even gotten to the yardage yet. So there's so many running backs out there who are losing touchdowns on vulture touchdowns. Like, for example, you got this kid at Wilson in Miami. I forget which of his actual name is, but he's looking really, really good, but he keeps losing his touchdowns to Ballage, so it's like, and that's just one of those examples there. So, when it comes to flex, you just play the best matchup or the best player, on your bench, obviously, but, for going forward, you really want to have, if you have 2 wide receivers, you want to have 3 stud wide, if you have 2 starting wide receiver spots, you want to get yourself 3 stud wide receivers. If you have 3 wide receiver spots, obviously you want to try to get a 4th. Now, I don't consider Cortland Sutton to be a stud, but he's studly enough to be your flex player and give you some good points there. So, it's all about the PPR for me.
That's right, my friend. That's right. Some excellent insight from my good friend, Jasen Dutch from the Voice from the Underground. I couldn't agree with you more on that. You just got to make sure you don't use it as a throwaway position. If you have some depth that's a big key. Find your depth early in the season. Know where you're going to go to in case of buys. know where you're going to go to in case you have injuries, but also know where you're going to go as far as matchups are concerned. And don't be afraid to go ahead and put that player that you think is going to go ahead and be at that level of your starters at that flex position. To me, I consider it like another starter because you have to utilize it each and every week, and you should be very serious about who you put in that flex position.
Yeah, and you can even look at, I've always talked about keeping your handcuffs, right? Go and get your starting running backs handcuffs. There's a couple of receiving cores out there where you have handcuff receivers too. Like you might have a guy like Keenan Allen or Tariq Hill who gets hurt a lot. You can find a guy on the Chargers or a guy on the Chiefs like McCole Hardman, for example, who might be available in your league. And if something does happen to Tyreek Hill, you can plug in Hardman right away, which is what you probably did when he got hurt earlier. So you don't really miss a beat for the most part. So even though you have Matt Moore throwing to him right now, but we're hoping Mahomes will be back sooner than later.
That's right, my friend. I'm hoping he comes back. He could come back as early as this week.
Probably
still
not,
up in the air.
Yeah.
Probably
they said week 10 looks like a pretty good bet.
Yeah, because it was supposed to be a 3-week injury. I think that's what they were talking about. But I know he was practicing already.
Yeah, and they're going to go to the playoffs anyway, so it's not like they're a fringe team. I'm pretty sure the Chiefs are going to make the playoffs. So, why kill your whole season, by bringing them back too early?
Well, we'll definitely, if I'm able to get on, if I'm able to go ahead and record with Chris Lardieri this week, we'll try to give you an update on the status of what's going on with Patrick Mahomes. Hopefully they'll give us the status next time we're available to go ahead and talk right here at Inside Sports Fantasy Football. But my friend, it's been a great episode. As always, I appreciate your insight and knowledge into what's going on, especially when talking about what happened in Week 8, and of course what people should do as far as how they plan their flex position. Any last thoughts on the way out?
I do have a last thought. Actually, I just want to tell everyone how unlucky I am. I have that 1-7 team I talked about, right? I was up by 40 points going into Monday night's game. 40 points. Some Packers running back, 42 points. So I lost. So you never know. It ain't over until it's over.
That's true, my friend. What's going on with your latest edition of what was happening at Voice from the Underground?
Well, this week we had Matt Delhauer on. Matt Delhauer is fantastic. He's a voiceover actor. He's also just a total geek, and he's a super smart guy. We had him on to talk about the psychology of how the movie Halloween, 1978 movie Halloween, and kind of talked about how that movie plays into today's society, especially when it comes to things like mental illness. And then for the other half of the show, we talked about Watchmen, which, if you haven't seen it, is astonishing. It sheds light on the 1921 Tulsa race riots, which a lot of people don't even know that happened. A lot of people are whining and complaining about it, saying that it's a woke show, or it's just spewing out propaganda. And let me just say something to you, if you believe that's true. There's been 62,000 television shows since the 1980s. That's a lot of TV shows. 62,000 shows. One of them decided to base its show on the aftermath of the Tulsa race riots. One. And it's about damn time, if you ask me. So, it's just the Watchmen show. I mean, it's really not super Watchmen-y, like if you're a Watchmen fan, but it's a great, it's so far so good. I've really enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting it to go where it was. I'd be interested real quick to hear, if you enjoyed the show, if you've watched it yet.
I've watched 2 episodes so far. I've enjoyed both. I thought episode 1 was stronger than episode 2, but episode 2 was still a decent outing. You're right. It does have its social awareness, trying to bring about something that people, like you said, have very little knowledge of, as the Tulsa race riots, they happen. There's something very terrible and something that our country has tried in many ways to sweep under the rug. But hopefully this will bring it to light as far as the sheer, just what happened and just how terrible it was. And hopefully we can go ahead and try and advance as a culture in a positive way from it and take steps that we can in the future to go ahead and be more positive to one another because of it. And with the Watchmen, you're right. It's not been very Watchmen-y as of yet, which I think also has gotten a lot of people, gotten some people out there. Yeah. Got some people just disinterested in it because it's trying to go ahead and maybe send a message that, some people don't really want to see. But you know what? It does send a message, but it also has some underlying clues. It's starting to sprinkle the clues in there as far as for what's going on for the rest of the season. So that to me is the interesting part of it, is because they're doing it little by little by little as far as the overall Watchmen part of it. And I think people need to watch it specifically for that, watch it for that. Also as well, watch it for the obvious things that they need to better understand and better educate themselves on as far as what happened in a previous lifetime in regards to the Tulsa riots, and also what we can do going forward with all the messages that it's trying to send, because they are good messages. We just got to go ahead and listen to them.
I completely agree with that. We got to get you back on Voice from the Underground soon. So
I would love it, man. Would love it. Yeah. It's always a great time when to go on there and destroy your show as best I can.
We do a great job of that on our own, though. So
yeah, exactly. So
if you guys want to, if you guys want to check out Voice from the Underground, you can do so. The website is www.vfupodcast.podbean. That's podbean.com, and all of the shows are listed there for you.
All right, and for us, it is the Pop Culture Cosmos on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel coming out on Friday. It's going to be the PCC Multiverse. We're obviously going to talk about the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's back again. Terminator: Dark Fate. I know there's a lot of people like Josh, myself, just not exactly enthralled that it's out. It needs more of a buy-in, but it is getting solid reviews. So we will talk about Terminator: Dark Fate as it comes out this weekend, among other things, including I'm going to give everybody a review of this right here. Helm Audio sent me these the other day, and I'll tell you what, these Helm Audio, the Series 5 earbuds, wireless earbuds, I'm going to give you advance notice that these are really good. So I'm going to give you the total lowdown on them this Friday on the PCC Multiverse, and look for it as well in my written form at popculturecosmos.wordpress.com. Like them, man. Really good.
You're really throwing out the ads there today, Gerald.
I know. I'm telling you.
Give us that money.
Exactly. The check is in the mail.
Yep.
Well, all right, my friend. It's been a great episode. I cannot thank you enough for being part of it. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on Week 9 when Week 9 concludes next week.
Right back here. It goes so fast, man.
It does. Just like that. It goes by. But when you're back in the saddle once again to talk some more great and inspirational fantasy football information right here at Inside Sports Fantasy Football.